The human diplomatic vessel. Valiant moved slowly through the dark space toward the massive station that floated ahead like a small moon. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge with his arms crossed, watching the station grow larger on the main viewing screen. The Galactic Council's primary station, Unity Nexus, was home to thousands of aliens from 7 different species, and today it would decide humanity's future. Jake had been in combat before, had faced down pirates and hostile forces in the outer colonies, but nothing made him more nervous than this meeting. 15 years ago, humanity had been invited to join the Council as probationary members, a trial period to see if humans could play nice with the rest of the galaxy. Now the Council had called them here for what they claimed was a vote on full membership. Helen Carter stood beside Jake, reviewing her notes on a datapad. She was Earth's top diplomat, a woman who had spent her entire career learning alien languages and customs. Her dark hair was pulled back tight, and she wore the formal blue uniform of the diplomatic corps. She looked calm, but Jake knew her well enough to see the tension in her shoulders. Behind them, Commander Lisa Grant checked her sidearm for the 3rd time that hour. Lisa was military through and through, a combat veteran who had fought in the colony wars. She did not trust the Council, and she made no secret of it. Jake had brought her along precisely because of that distrust. The Valiant docked at Unity Nexus without incident, and the airlock hissed open to reveal a delegation of Council officials waiting to greet them. The lead greeter was a Vrex, one of the insectoid species that made up the Council's military backbone. Its compound eyes glittered in the station's lights, and its mandibles clicked in what Jake hoped was a friendly greeting. Helen stepped forward and performed the traditional Vrex bow, pressing her palms together and dipping her head. The Vrex returned the gesture, then led them through the gleaming corridors of the station toward the Council chambers. The Council chamber was enormous, a circular room with 7 raised platforms arranged in a half-circle. Each platform held representatives from one of the Council species. Jake recognized most of them from his briefings. The Vrex occupied one platform, their chitinous forms clustered together like a single organism. The Lumens held another, their crystalline bodies refracting light into rainbow patterns across the walls. The Korath were present too, floating in suspension fields, their translucent forms pulsing with inner light. The other 4 species were equally impressive, each one evolved on worlds vastly different from Earth. Counselor Zarketh, the Vrex leader, spoke first. His voice came through a translator device that rendered his clicking language into standard English. He welcomed the human delegation and praised humanity's achievements during their probationary period. He mentioned the medical advances humans had shared, the fusion drive technology, the peaceful exploration of new systems. Helen responded with gracious words of thanks, speaking of humanity's desire for friendship and cooperation among the stars. It all sounded wonderful, diplomatic, and warm, but Jake noticed things. Small things. The way the Vrex counselor's antennae twitched when Helen asked about trade route access. The way the Lumen representative's colors shifted to deeper reds when questions about shared defense came up. The way the Korath remained silent when they should have been participating. He had been a ship captain for 20 years, and he had learned to read people, even alien people. Something was wrong here. The presentation lasted 3 hours. Helen showed recordings of human colonies thriving, of joint missions with Council species, of cultural exchanges and scientific cooperation. The Council members nodded and made approving sounds. Then came the questions, and that was when Jake's instincts started screaming. The questions were odd, focused on things that should not matter for a membership vote. How many warships did humanity currently operate? What were the defensive capabilities of Earth's orbital platforms? How long would it take to evacuate the colony worlds in an emergency? Helen answered as best she could, deflecting the more sensitive questions, but Jake saw her glance his way more than once. She felt it too. When the session finally ended, the Council announced they would deliberate and provide an answer within 3 days. The human delegation was given quarters on the station and told to relax and enjoy the facilities. Jake did not relax. As soon as they were alone in their assigned rooms, he gathered Helen and Lisa for a private conversation. Lisa swept the room for listening devices and found 4. She disabled them with the electromagnetic pulse device she had smuggled aboard. Once they were secure, Jake spoke quietly. He told them what he had observed, the strange questions and evasive answers. Helen agreed, admitting that the whole session had felt wrong. The council was hiding something, and she suspected it was not good news. Lisa suggested they leave immediately, get back to the Valiant, and jump out of the system before anything happened. Jake considered it, but running without proof would make humanity look paranoid and guilty of something. They needed to know what the council was planning. That night, Helen received an encrypted message on her personal communicator. The source was anonymous, but the encryption key was Korath in origin. The message was simple, asking her to meet at a specific location on the station at midnight. Helen showed Jake the message, and they debated whether it was a trap. Lisa insisted on coming along as security. Jake agreed, and the three of them made their way through the station's dimly lit corridors after hours. The meeting location was a cargo bay on the station's lower levels, far from the diplomatic quarters. They found a young Korath waiting for them, its form flickering with anxious colors. The Korath introduced itself as Thel, a junior member of the council's administrative staff. Thel spoke quickly, its translated voice trembling with fear and guilt. What it told them made Jake's blood run cold. The council had no intention of granting humanity full membership. The entire 15-year probationary period had been a lie, a cover for an intelligence operation. The council had been systematically studying humanity, cataloging weaknesses, mapping military assets, and analyzing defensive strategies. They had been preparing for war. Thel provided data files as proof, showing intercepted communications, fleet deployment orders, and attack plans. In 72 hours, a combined council armada would strike Earth and all 12 human colony worlds simultaneously. The attack was designed to be overwhelming and final. Jake asked why. Thel's colors shifted to dark blues and purples, colors that Helen recognized as shame. The council viewed humanity as a threat, Thel explained. Humans had advanced too quickly, spreading through space faster than any species in recorded history. Human technology was becoming competitive with council tech, and human military tactics were aggressive and unpredictable. The council feared that in another century, humanity would be strong enough to challenge their authority. So they decided to eliminate the threat while humans were still weak. Helen asked why Thel was betraying the council. The young Korath's form brightened slightly, and it explained that not all council members agreed with this plan. The Lumens had voted against it, and many Korath found it morally wrong. But they were outvoted and overruled. Thel could not stand by and watch genocide happen without at least warning the victims. Jake thanked Thel and promised humanity would remember this kindness. Then he asked the critical question, could they send a warning to Earth without the council intercepting it? Thel shook its head. All communications from Unity Nexus were monitored. Any attempt to warn Earth would be detected immediately, and the council would simply move up their timetable. The attack would happen within hours instead of days. The three humans returned to their quarters in silence. Jake's mind raced through options, each one worse than the last. They could try to fight their way to the Valiant and escape, but station security would stop them before they reached the docking bay. They could try to sabotage the station, but that would not stop the armada already gathering at the edge of council space. They could do nothing and hope Thel was wrong, but Jake knew in his gut that every word was true. Finally, Jake made his decision. They would send the warning anyway. Yes, the council would detect it. Yes, it would trigger an early attack. But Earth needed time to prepare, even if it was only hours instead of days. Humanity deserved a chance to fight back. He looked at Helen and Lisa, and they both nodded. They understood what this meant. The Valiant and its crew of 43 people would be trapped here, prisoners or worse. But Earth might survive. Jake called Lieutenant Chris Adams, their communications officer, who had remained aboard the Valiant. He gave Chris careful instructions using old military code that the council would not recognize. Chris was to prepare a burst transmission using an ancient Earth radio protocol, something so primitive that the council's advanced systems might not even notice it until it was too late. The message would contain everything Thel had given them, every piece of evidence, every detail of the planned attack. Helen and Lisa prepared a distraction. There was a ceremonial dinner scheduled for that evening, a formal affair where the council would wine and dine the human delegation while pretending to deliberate their membership. Helen and Lisa would attend and act as if nothing was wrong. They would smile and make small talk and buy Chris every possible second to complete his work. The dinner was torture. Jake sat at a long table surrounded by council members who were secretly planning to murder his entire species. He ate food he could not taste and made conversation he could not remember. Helen was brilliant, engaging the counselors in lengthy discussions about human culture and art. Lisa played her part too, asking questions about council military traditions that flattered the Rex officers present. The minutes crawled by like hours. Then Jake's communicator vibrated once. The signal. Chris had sent the message. Somewhere in space, a stream of data was racing toward Earth at light speed, carrying humanity's only warning. For exactly 10 seconds, Jake felt relief. Then the alarms started blaring throughout Unity Nexus, and he knew they were out of time. The alarms cut through the dinner hall like a knife, and every alien head turned toward the human delegation. Jake kept his face neutral, but his hand moved slowly toward the weapon hidden under his formal jacket. Counselor Zarketh rose from his seat, his mandibles clicking rapidly as he spoke into a communication device. Within seconds, armed guards flooded into the hall, their weapons trained on Jake, Helen, and Lisa. The pretense of friendship evaporated in an instant, replaced by cold hostility. Zarketh approached the table, his compound eyes fixed on Jake. The translator rendered his words with harsh clarity. The humans had sent an unauthorized transmission, a violation of station protocols and a breach of diplomatic trust. Jake met the counselor's gaze without flinching. He told Zarketh that they knew about the planned attack, knew about the council's betrayal, knew everything. For a moment, silence filled the hall. Then Zarketh made a sound that might have been laughter. He admitted it freely now that pretense was unnecessary. Yes, the council had planned to eliminate humanity. Yes, the probationary period had been a deception. And yes, the attack would now happen immediately instead of in 3 days. All because the humans had been foolish enough to send their warning. Helen stood up, her voice shaking with controlled anger. She asked how the council could justify genocide against a species that had done nothing but seek friendship. A Lumen counselor responded, its crystalline form pulsing with orange light. It explained in emotionless tones that humanity was too aggressive, too unpredictable, too dangerous to be allowed to continue expanding. Better to eliminate the threat now while it was manageable than to face a human empire in a century. Lisa cursed and started to draw her weapon, but a dozen alien guns pointed at her head convinced her to stop. The guards escorted the human delegation out of the hall and back toward their quarters. Jake's mind raced as they walked. The message had been sent, but would it be enough? How long would it take to reach Earth? Would humanity have time to prepare any kind of defense? The guards sealed them inside their quarters, and Jake heard the locks engage with a heavy clunk. They were prisoners now, trapped on an enemy station while their species faced extinction. Back on Earth, the transmission arrived at Fleet Command headquarters in Geneva at exactly 3 in the morning local time. The overnight communications officer almost dismissed it as junk data because of its ancient protocol, but something made him look closer. When he saw the encryption signature and realized it was from the Valiant, he immediately woke Admiral Frank Jensen. Frank was a gray-haired veteran who had served in the merchant fleet before joining the military. He read the decoded message 3 times, his face growing paler with each reading. Then he activated Emergency Protocol Omega. Within 30 minutes, the Human Defense Coalition assembled in the crisis center beneath Geneva. Military leaders, government officials, and scientists appeared via hologram from every corner of human space. President Claire Mitchell joined from her residence, still in her nightclothes but fully alert. Frank presented the evidence that Thel had provided, and the room erupted in angry voices. Some demanded immediate retaliation. Others insisted it must be a trick. Claire silenced them all with a raised hand and asked Frank for his assessment. Frank laid out the brutal truth. The evidence was solid, corroborated by patterns they had noticed themselves over the years. The Council's questions had always been too focused on military matters. Their trade agreements had always limited human expansion. Their technology sharing had always stopped just short of anything truly useful. They had been preparing for this moment for years. The question now was not whether the attack would come, but whether humanity could survive it. Claire asked about Earth's defensive capabilities. Frank admitted they were limited. Humanity had 30 warships scattered across 12 colonies, built primarily for patrol and pirate suppression, not fleet combat. Earth itself had orbital defenses, but they were designed to stop asteroids and debris, not a coordinated military assault. Against the Council's full armada, humanity would last perhaps a few hours before being overwhelmed. Then Dr. Nathan Cross spoke up. Nathan was the head of Advanced Weapons Research, a secretive division that operated out of facilities in the Kuiper Belt. He had been silent during the discussion, but now he asked for permission to brief the group on classified projects. Claire granted it immediately. What Nathan revealed changed everything. For 15 years since humanity first encountered the Council, a small group of military planners and scientists had been preparing for exactly this scenario. They had never fully trusted the aliens, had never believed that advanced civilizations would simply welcome humans as equals, so they had built insurance, hidden shipyards in the Kuiper Belt, disguised as mining operations, had been constructing warships in secret. Not 30 ships, but 70, each one equipped with weapons systems designed specifically to counter Council species. Nathan explained Project Equalizer. Human scientists had studied every Council species exhaustively, looking for weaknesses. The Vrex relied on neural network interfaces that connected their ships and soldiers. Humans had developed electromagnetic pulse weapons that could disrupt those networks, turning coordinated fleets into confused mobs. The Lumens were crystalline beings, vulnerable to specific sonic frequencies. Humans had built disruptor missiles that would shatter their structures. The Korath were telepaths who used psionic communication for tactical coordination. Humans had created dampening fields that would blind them. The room sat in stunned silence as Nathan finished his briefing. These weapons had never been tested in combat, and there was no guarantee they would work as designed. But they gave humanity a chance, and a chance was more than anyone had dared hope for minutes ago. Claire made the decision immediately. She authorized full mobilization of the hidden fleet and deployment of all equalizer weapons. If the Council wanted war, humanity would give them one they would never forget. Admiral Frank handed command of the defense fleet to Captain Ryan Hughes. Ryan was a combat veteran from the Colony Wars, a man who had fought pirates and raiders in the outer systems where there were no rules and no mercy. His ship, the Defiance, was the largest of the secret warships, a heavy cruiser bristling with untested weapons. Frank gave Ryan simple orders. Buy Earth time to evacuate civilians and fortify the colonies. Make the Council pay for every inch of space they took. Ryan assembled his fleet within hours. 70 warships emerged from hiding, their crews a mix of regular military and civilian volunteers who had been training in secret for years. They knew their mission might be suicide, but not one of them hesitated. Among them was Commander Sophie Blake, leading a squadron of destroyers. Sophie had lost her family to pirates years ago, and had been waiting for a chance to prove herself in real combat. Beside her was Lieutenant Marcus Webb, a tactical genius who could read battle patterns like other people read books. Meanwhile, on Unity Nexus, Jake and his crew were planning their own move. They could not just sit in their quarters while Earth burned. Chris Adams had managed to maintain a hidden link to the Valiant's computer systems, and he worked frantically to bypass station security. Helen convinced Lisa that a frontal assault would be suicide, that they needed to be smart about this. They studied guard patrol patterns and mapped escape routes. They had 43 people aboard the Valiant, most of them civilians, but every single one volunteered for whatever desperate plan Jake could devise. Back on Earth, the evacuation began. Civilian transports launched from the colonies, carrying families and children toward the outer systems where they might be safe. The agricultural colony of New Haven went into full defensive mode, with every able-bodied adult joining the militia. Major Katie Foster took command of the hidden defense batteries, massive railguns built into artificial mountains. She had 2 million civilians depending on her, and she swore they would not die without a fight. Dr. Nathan supervised the deployment of Earth's home defense grid, thousands of satellites that everyone thought were for weather monitoring and communications suddenly revealed their true purpose: weapons platforms, each one automated and linked into a central targeting network. Lunar bases opened hidden hangar doors to reveal goop and batteries that could hit targets in high orbit. Mars Colony, humanity's second-largest settlement, activated underground complexes filled with atmospheric fighters. Earth's entire solar system transformed from a peaceful collection of colonies into a fortress. President Claire addressed all of humanity in a live broadcast. Her face appeared on every screen in human space, from Earth to the furthest colony. She told them the truth about the Council's betrayal, about the incoming attack, about the secret preparations. She did not sugarcoat the danger. Many would die in the coming hours. But she promised that humanity would not surrender, would not bow, would not beg for mercy from beings who had planned their murder. They were the children of Earth, descendants of survivors who had endured ice ages and plagues and wars. They would show the galaxy what it meant to threaten human families. The speech was intercepted by Council intelligence and spread rapidly through their communication networks. Some Council species began to question the wisdom of attacking such a determined enemy. Rumors spread about the Korath Prime shipyard, about human preparations that no one had suspected. The Lumens, who had voted against the attack from the beginning, sent a private message to their delegation at Unity Nexus expressing their disapproval. But it was too late to stop the momentum. The Council Armada began moving toward human space. 800 warships, the largest military force assembled in Council history, all aimed at one target: humanity. The various species commanders coordinated their approach, planning to strike all human colonies simultaneously. They expected resistance but believed their overwhelming numbers would crush it quickly. They had studied human tactics and believed they understood human psychology. They were wrong on both counts. Counselor Zarketh visited the imprisoned human delegation one final time. He told Jake that the Armada was already in motion, that nothing could stop it now. He said that humanity's warning had only hastened their own destruction. Jake listened calmly, then delivered his response. He told Zarketh that the Council had made a fatal mistake. They had assumed humans would react like civilized beings, like species who had never known true war. But humanity came from a death world where everything had tried to kill them for millions of years. They had evolved in conflict, been shaped by struggle, and they did not know how to quit. Jake looked directly at Zarketh and spoke words that would later become famous across the galaxy. He said the Council had 72 hours before they regretted their decision. He suggested they run while they still could. Zarketh made that laughing sound again, but this time it seemed less certain. He left the humans locked in their quarters and returned to coordinate with the Armada. The pieces were in motion now, and nothing could stop what was coming. Admiral Frank Jensen stood in the command center beneath Geneva and made a decision that would change galactic history. He was not going to wait for the Council Armada to reach Earth. Humanity would not sit behind defenses and pray for survival. They would strike first, strike hard, and strike where it would hurt the most. He authorized Operation Hammerfall, a preemptive attack plan that had been developed years ago by paranoid military strategists who never trusted the Council's peaceful overtures. Those paranoid strategists were about to be proven right. Captain Ryan Hughes received his orders aboard the Defiance and allowed himself a cold smile. The Council expected humanity to cower and defend. Instead, Ryan would take the war straight to their doorstep. He selected 20 ships from the Hidden Fleet, the fastest and most maneuverable vessels in the human arsenal. His orders were simple: cripple the Council's war machine before it could fully deploy. The primary target was the Vrex shipyard at Korath Prime, a massive orbital facility where a third of the Council invasion fleet was still being armed and supplied. The human strike force jumped into hyperspace using a route that officially did not exist. Years ago, human explorers had discovered an unmapped corridor through hyperspace, a dangerous shortcut that cut weeks off the journey to Council territory. They had never reported it to the Council, keeping it secret for exactly this kind of emergency. The corridor was unstable and narrow, requiring precise navigation, but it would allow the human fleet to appear deep. Inside Council space without warning, Ryan stood on the bridge of the Defiance as they emerged from hyperspace, right on top of Korath Prime. The Vrex shipyard hung in space, like a massive mechanical flower, its docking arms extending in all directions. Dozens of Council warships were attached to those arms, receiving ammunition and supplies. The shipyard's defensive platforms were active but not on high alert. They had never expected an attack this deep in their own territory. That mistake would cost them everything. The human fleet opened fire immediately. Ryan had divided his ships into 3 groups, each targeting a different section of the shipyard. The Defiance led the main assault, launching waves of electromagnetic pulse missiles at the docked warships. The missiles were Nathan Cross's design, specifically built to exploit the Vrex neural network systems. When they detonated, cascading electromagnetic pulses ripped through the connected ships like lightning through water. Vrex crew members collapsed as their neural interfaces overloaded. Ship systems crashed simultaneously. Defensive weapons went silent. In less than 5 minutes, 60 Council warships were dead in space, their crews unconscious or dying. Commander Sophie Blake led her destroyer squadron against the shipyard's construction bays. Her ships were smaller and faster than the Defiance, perfect for precision strikes. Marcus Webb, her tactical officer, had identified the critical power junctions that fed the entire facility. Sophie's destroyers launched kinetic missiles, simple hunks of metal accelerated to incredible speeds. When they hit the power junctions, secondary explosions tore through the shipyard's infrastructure. Entire sections went dark. Construction cranes collapsed. Docking arms broke free and drifted into space, still clutching damaged warships. The third group of human ships, led by Captain Greg Palmer aboard the cruiser Retribution, engaged the shipyard's defensive platforms. These platforms were automated systems not relying on Vrex neural networks, so the electromagnetic pulse weapons were less effective. Instead, Greg used conventional missiles and railgun fire. His ships moved in coordinated patterns, never staying in one position long enough for the platforms to get a lock. It was a tactic developed fighting pirates in the outer colonies, and it worked just as well against Council defenses. The battle lasted exactly 1 hour and 17 minutes. When it was over, Korath Prime was a field of debris. 63 Council warships destroyed or disabled. The shipyard itself, a structure that had taken the Vrex 2 centuries to build, was broken into pieces. Thousands of Vrex were dead or dying in the wreckage, and humanity had accomplished it all without losing a single ship. Ryan broadcast a message on all Council frequencies. His voice was calm and cold as he delivered humanity's response to the Council's betrayal. He told them this was just the beginning. He told them they had tried to crush humanity in their sleep, but had instead awakened something they could not handle. He told them the next strike would be worse. Then he delivered the final line that would echo across the galaxy: "Run while you can." The message reached the Council leadership within minutes, and chaos erupted. Their intelligence had indicated humanity possessed perhaps 30 military vessels total, mostly small patrol craft. The existence of a hidden fleet, capable of striking deep into Council territory, had never been suspected. Worse, the effectiveness of human weapons against Vrex neural systems suggested years of research and preparation. The Council realized with growing horror that humanity had been planning for war just as carefully as they had. Emergency sessions were called. The Vrex demanded immediate retaliation. The Lumens argued for caution. The Korath remained neutral, their telepaths sensing something in human determination that frightened them. Other Council species began questioning the wisdom of continuing the attack. If humans could do this much damage with a small strike force, what could they do when fighting for their homes? But Councillor Zarketh refused to back down. Pride and fear drove his decision. If the Council showed weakness now, if they let humanity survive after this humiliation, their authority over the galaxy would crumble. He ordered the main armada to accelerate their attack schedule. 800 warships would strike human colonies immediately, overwhelming them with sheer numbers. The Council would crush humanity so completely that no other species would ever dare challenge them again. On Earth, news of the Korath Prime victory spread like wildfire. People celebrated in the streets, cheering for Ryan and his crews. But Admiral Frank knew the truth. They had won a battle, not the war. The Council armada was still coming, and 70 human ships could not stop 800 enemy vessels. Earth's only hope was the defensive preparations, the hidden weapons, and the determination of every human to fight to the last breath. Dr. Nathan worked around the clock deploying equalizer systems across Earth and the colonies. Weapon satellites came online, defense grids synchronized. Every advantage humanity could manufacture was put into place. But Nathan knew his weapons were untested. They might work perfectly or fail catastrophically. There was no way to until the shooting started. On Unity Nexus, Jake and his crew watched the news feed showing the Korath Prime attack. Their guards seemed nervous now, unsure whether the humans they were watching were prisoners or something more dangerous. Jake noticed the change in their behavior and began planning. The Valiant was still docked at the station, and if they could reach it, they might be able to escape. More than that, they might be able to do some damage on their way out. Helen had continued her quiet friendship with Prax. the young Lumen Guard. Prax had been shaken by the casualty reports from Korath Prime, questioning whether the Council's attack on humanity was truly justified. Helen carefully nurtured those doubts, pointing out that the Council had struck first with their planned genocide. Humanity was only defending itself. Prax's crystalline form flickered with conflicted colors, but Helen could see the guard was wavering. Lisa spent her time memorizing the station's layout from glimpses through doorways and windows. She noted guard rotations and security checkpoints. She identified weapons lockers and emergency systems. If they were going to escape, they would need perfect timing and a lot of luck. But Lisa had survived worse odds before. She believed they could do it. Chris Adams, still aboard the Valiant, had been quietly rebuilding the ship's systems. The Council had disabled their weapons and locked down their engines, but Chris was one of the best engineers in the fleet. He worked slowly and carefully, hiding his progress during guard inspections. He managed to restore basic engine function and get the weapon systems partially online. It would not be enough to fight a battle, but it might be enough to break free from the docking clamps. The Council Armada reached the edge of human territory 3 days after Korath Prime. Their target was New Haven, the agricultural colony with 2 million civilians. The Council commanders chose it deliberately. New Haven was lightly defended compared to Earth, and its destruction would demonstrate the price of human resistance. The Armada expected minimal opposition. They were wrong. Admiral Frank had positioned 40 human warships around New Haven in a defensive sphere. Ryan Hughes commanded the forward elements, his ships positioned between the incoming Armada and the colony. On the planet's surface, Major Katie Foster prepared her hidden railgun batteries. Every civilian who could hold a weapon had been armed and trained. New Haven would not fall easily. The Council Armada emerged from hyperspace in a massive formation, their 800 ships blotting out the stars. Their commanders broadcast surrender demands to the human fleet. Ryan's response was to open fire. The Battle of New Haven had begun, and it would be the bloodiest engagement in galactic history. Human ships immediately began using tactics the Council had never seen. Frigate Resolute, commanded by Captain Amy Torres, accelerated directly at the Council formation. Every Council ship targeted it, pouring weapons fire into the small vessel. At the last moment, Amy and her crew evacuated in escape pods. The Resolute, packed with antimatter charges, detonated in the center of the Council fleet. The explosion vaporized 19 ships instantly and damaged dozens more. It was a suicide run by Council standards, insane and wasteful. For humans, it was an acceptable trade. Sophie Blake exploited the chaos, driving her destroyers through the gap in the Council formation. Her targets were the Korath command vessels, the telepathic coordinators who gave the Council fleet its tactical advantage. Her ships launched psionic dampener missiles, another of Nathan's experimental weapons. The missiles exploded in bursts of electromagnetic noise that overwhelmed Korath telepathy. Suddenly blind to their fleet's collective consciousness, the Korath coordinators panicked. Council ships lost coordination and began firing on each other in the confusion. The battle raged across space around New Haven, and humanity showed the Council what 15 years of secret preparation could accomplish. Every dirty trick, every desperate tactic, every sacrifice play developed over millennia of human warfare came into use. The Council was learning a harsh lesson. Humanity did not fight fair, and they never gave up. The Battle of New Haven raged for 14 hours without pause. Ryan Hughes watched his tactical display as ship after ship disappeared from the screen. The destroyer Avenger took a direct hit and broke apart, scattering crew pods into space. The cruiser Relentless lost its engines and drifted helplessly until Council ships finished it off. The frigate Dawn's Light made a final run at a Vrex battleship before both vessels exploded in a ball of fire. Every loss hurt, but Ryan kept his face calm and his voice steady. His crew needed to see confidence even when he felt none. The Council's numerical advantage was grinding them down despite humanity's tricks and weapons. For every Council ship destroyed, humanity lost irreplaceable vessels and trained crews. Sophie Blake's destroyer squadron was down to 4 ships from the original 12. Her hull was scarred with weapons fire, and half her systems were running on emergency power. Marcus Webb worked frantically at his tactical station, trying to find patterns in the chaos that they could exploit. He called out targeting priorities while Sophie maneuvered through the deadly space between ships, dodging fire that would have vaporized them. On New Haven's surface, Major Katie Foster commanded the planetary defense batteries with grim determination. Her railguns fired tungsten slugs at relativistic speeds, punching through council ship armor like paper. But the batteries had limited ammunition and she was running low. Council landing craft kept trying to break through the orbital battle, carrying troops to capture the colony. Katie's guns tore them apart one after another, filling near-orbit space with debris. She had 2 million civilians sheltering in underground bunkers, and she would die before letting Council soldiers reach them. The colony administrator, Paul Dixon, coordinated the civilian evacuation from a command bunker deep underground. Transport ships kept launching from hidden pads, carrying families toward the outer system. Every ship that escaped was a small victory, but there were not enough ships for everyone. Paul knew that thousands would be left behind if the defense failed. He kept working, kept organizing, kept sending people to safety even as the sounds of battle rumbled through the ground above him. Ryan finally gave the order he had been dreading. The human fleet would retreat. They had fought as hard as they could, bought as much time as possible, but staying longer would just mean dying for nothing. The surviving ships began a fighting withdrawal, conducting running battles as they fell back toward Earth. The Council Armada pursued them with vengeful fury, their commanders determined to finish what they had started. The fleet had been reduced from 800 ships to 532, and the Council was angry at the losses humanity had inflicted. Admiral Frank watched the retreat from Earth and prepared for the final battle. Every defensive system humanity possessed was ready. The home defense grid satellites armed their weapons. Lunar railguns charged their capacitors. Mars colony fighters launched from their underground hangars and formed up in orbital patterns. Earth's orbital fortresses, massive stations that had been disguised as commercial facilities, revealed their true nature. Weapon ports opened, shield generators activated, and fighter bays disgorged hundreds of small craft. The retreating human fleet led the Council Armada straight into the Sol system, into the trap that humanity had spent 15 years preparing. As the Council ships crossed into the inner system, Admiral Frank activated the final surprise. The asteroids that had been positioned around the system were not natural. They were hollowed-out weapons platforms, each one packed with missiles and railguns. The Council fleet suddenly found themselves in a crossfire from every direction. The Second Battle of Earth began with humanity holding the advantage for the first time. They were fighting on their home ground, in a system they had mapped down to every last rock and ice chunk. Every orbital platform became a fortress. Every relay station became a weapon. The Council found themselves fighting not just a fleet, but an entire solar system that had been weaponized against them. Dr. Nathan coordinated the defense from his command center in Geneva, working alongside Admiral Frank. He unleashed the full arsenal of Project Equalizer, directing different weapons against different Council species. Electromagnetic pulse missiles targeted VREX ships, disrupting their neural networks. Sonic disruptors shattered lumen vessels into glittering fragments. Psionic dampeners blinded the Korath coordinators. Every weapon Nathan had developed was tested in combat now, and most of them worked better than he had dared hope. But the Council adapted quickly. Their commanders began spreading their ships out, preventing the humans from destroying multiple vessels with single strikes. They rotated fresh ships to the front as damaged ones fell back. They concentrated fire on human defensive platforms, destroying them one by one. The battle became a brutal slugging match, with both sides taking terrible casualties. Ryan brought the Defiance alongside one of Earth's orbital fortresses, using its bulk as cover while his crew made emergency repairs. Half his weapons were offline, his shields were failing, and he had lost a third of his crew. But he refused to give up. As soon as the repairs were complete enough, he took the Defiance back into the fight. So, Fee's remaining destroyers formed up with him, and together they hit a Council formation that was trying to break through to Earth's orbital factories. The fighting spread across the entire Sol system. Battles raged around Jupiter's moons, where human mining operations revealed hidden weapon caches. Skirmishes erupted in the asteroid belt, where Council ships tried to use the rocks for cover only to find automated defense drones waiting. A running fight developed near Saturn, where a human carrier launched wave after wave of fighters against pursuing Council vessels. President Claire Mitchell broadcast to the human forces from the command bunker. She told them the whole galaxy was watching. She reminded them they were fighting for their families, their homes, their very right to exist, She said that even if they lost, humanity would be remembered as the species that refused to die quietly. Her words were recorded and transmitted across human space, giving strength to exhausted soldiers and terrified civilians. Yet slowly, inevitably, the Council's numbers began to tell. For every Council ship humanity destroyed, they lost vessels they could not replace. Admiral Frank watched the tactical situation deteriorate and faced a terrible truth. Humanity might win this battle through sheer determination, but they would lose the war through attrition. The Council could replace their losses. Humanity could not. The fighting continued through a full day and into a second. Crews on both sides were exhausted, operating on stimulants and desperation. Ships that should have been scrapped kept fighting with jury-rigged repairs. Weapon systems ran hot, their barrels glowing from constant fire. Space around Earth was filled with debris, making navigation hazardous even without enemy fire. Then everything changed because of what Jake Morrison did on Unity Nexus. While the fleets battled around Earth, Jake had been preparing his own desperate move. He had gathered his crew and explained his plan. It was insane and would likely get them all killed, but it was the only card they had left to play. Helen and Lisa agreed immediately. Chris confirmed the Valiant was as ready as it would ever be. The 43 humans trapped on the Council station prepared to either escape or die trying. Prax, the young Lumen guard, had finally been convinced by Helen's arguments. The guard could no longer support what the Council was doing. Prax agreed to help create a distraction, a brief window where the humans might reach their ship. The Lumen knew this decision meant exile or death, but Prax's moral core could not accept genocide. The escape happened during a shift change when security was lightest. Prax created a power fluctuation in the detention section, just enough to disrupt the door locks and sensors for 30 seconds. Jake and Lisa led the charge out of their quarters, overwhelming the surprised guards with brutal efficiency. Council species had lived in peace for centuries and had no experience with close-quarters combat. Humans who had evolved fighting each other knew exactly how to disable an opponent quickly and quietly. The delegation fought through Unity Nexus corridors toward the docking bay. Lisa took point, her military training evident in every movement. She cleared corners and neutralized guards before they could raise an alarm. Helen stayed in the middle of the group, protecting the civilian members of the crew. Jake brought up the rear, watching for pursuit. They moved fast and low, using the station's architecture for cover. Alarms finally sounded when they were halfway to the docking bay. Station security forces mobilized, but the humans had a head start. Chris remotely activated the Valiant from his hidden position aboard the ship, and the vessel tore free from its docking clamps with a screech of metal. The ship's weapons, only partially repaired, fired at the docking bay doors, blasting them open. Jake's crew sprinted the final distance as the station's atmosphere began venting into space. Emergency doors tried to close, but Lisa shut out their controls. They dove through the Valiant's airlock one by one, with Jake being the last aboard. The ship pulled away from Unity Nexus as Council ships moved to intercept. Chris pushed the engines beyond safe limits, and the Valiant jumped into hyperspace just as weapons fire lit up the space where they had been. But Jake was not running back to Earth. He had a different destination in mind, one that would force the Council to make an impossible choice. He ordered Chris to set course for the Council Homeworlds cluster, the region of space containing the capital planets of all 7 Council species. Helen understood immediately what Jake intended to do, and her face went pale. He was going to threaten the Council's families just as they had threatened humanity's. He was going to make them choose between continuing their attack on Earth or protecting their own homes. It was a desperate bluff from a single damaged ship, but Jake was counting on the fear that humanity had instilled during the battles at Korath Prime and New Haven. He was betting everything on one truth. The Council no longer knew what humans were capable of, and that uncertainty might be enough to save Earth. The Valiant raced through hyperspace toward the Council Homeworlds cluster while Jake prepared his message. Helen argued with him in the ship's small conference room, her voice tight with emotion. She said that threatening civilian populations made humanity no better than the Council. Jake listened to her concerns, but his face remained hard. He reminded her that the Council had targeted New Haven, a colony full of farmers and families. They had planned to attack Earth itself, home to billions of civilians. The Council had set the rules of this war, and now they would live with the consequences. Lisa supported Jake's decision without hesitation. She pointed out that they had 43 people on a damaged diplomatic vessel against the entire Council military. They had no weapons that could actually harm a planet, no fleet backing them up, nothing but the reputation humanity had earned at Korath Prime and New Haven. Their only advantage was that the Council no longer knew what humans were capable of. Fear was their weapon and they needed to use it. Chris worked on preparing the broadcast from the engineering section. The message needed to reach every Council world simultaneously, needed to be impossible to ignore or suppress. He routed it through emergency channels, the kind used for natural disasters and critical announcements. When Jake was ready, Chris gave him the signal. Jake's face appeared on screens across Council space. His uniform was torn and dirty from the fight on Unity Nexus. His expression was cold and determined. He spoke directly to the Council leadership, and his words were simple. The Council had come for humanity's families. They had targeted human children on New Haven. They had attempted genocide. Now humanity was returning the favor. The Valiant was approaching the Council homeworlds, and every minute the Council fleet spent attacking Earth was another minute that brought human vengeance closer to their families. It was a complete bluff. The Valiant had minimal weapons and no ability to harm a planetary population, but the Council did not know that. They had watched humanity destroy Korath Prime with brutal efficiency. They had seen human ships conduct suicide runs without hesitation. They had witnessed tactics and weapons they never imagined. The uncertainty ate at them. What if the humans had more hidden capabilities? What if this damaged ship carried some terrible weapon they had not revealed yet? The message spread through Council space like wildfire. Citizens on the homeworlds watched the broadcast and felt fear for the first time in generations. Parents looked at their children and wondered if human ships were already in orbit, invisible and waiting. Council military commanders demanded to know how a single human vessel had penetrated so deep into their territory. The questions multiplied faster than answers could be provided. Back at Earth, the battle had reached a critical point. Ryan Hughes commanded the Defiance with half his crew dead and most systems failing. His ship had taken so much damage that it barely held together. But he kept fighting, kept coordinating with Sophie's destroyers and the orbital fortresses. They had reduced the Council fleet to just under 300 ships, but humanity was down to fewer than 30 operational vessels. The math was brutal and unavoidable. Humanity would lose through attrition. Admiral Frank prepared to give the evacuation order for Earth's orbital facilities when his communications officer shouted for attention. The Council fleet was receiving emergency transmissions. Their ships were breaking formation, turning away from Earth. Frank watched in disbelief as the entire enemy armada began retreating from the Sol system. He demanded to know what had happened, and then Jake's broadcast reached Earth. President Claire Mitchell watched Jake's message from the command bunker and felt a mixture of horror and hope. Jake had crossed a line, had threatened the same atrocities the Council had planned for humanity, but he had also saved Earth. The Council was withdrawing, choosing to protect their own worlds rather than risk whatever Jake might do. It was the most desperate bluff in human history, and somehow it had worked. Counselor Zar Keth sat in the command center of his flagship, compound eyes watching the tactical displays. He had lost over 500 ships trying to crush humanity, and now he faced impossible choices. If he continued the attack on Earth, the human vessel might reach Council homeworlds and cause catastrophic damage. But if he withdrew, it would look like the Council had been defeated by an inferior species. His political rivals would use it against him. More importantly, every other species in the galaxy would see that the Council could be challenged. The other Council members were already breaking ranks. The Lumen representatives announced they were withdrawing all support for the invasion, calling it a crime against sentient life. Several Lumen ships broke formation and returned home immediately. The Korath remained neutral, but their telepaths advised caution, sensing in humanity a determination that bordered on suicidal. Other Council species began questioning the entire operation in emergency sessions on their homeworlds. Zarketh made his decision. He ordered a full retreat of the Council armada. The invasion was over. His career was probably over too, but survival came first. The remaining Council ships turned and jumped into hyperspace, leaving the Sol system behind. 3 weeks of planning and preparation, 800 warships, thousands of trained soldiers, all of it ending in retreat because of one human ship and the fear it carried. The human fleet watched the council ships disappear and could not quite believe it. They had won. Against impossible odds, against overwhelming numbers, humanity had survived. The cheering started on the Defiance and spread to every human vessel. Crews hugged each other and cried with relief. On Earth's surface, sirens announced the all-clear and people poured into the streets celebrating. But the cost had been terrible. 58 warships destroyed, including most of the secret fleet humanity had built over 15 years. 12,000 military personnel dead and another 8,000 wounded. New Haven had lost 900,000 civilians despite Katie Foster's heroic defense. Entire families wiped out. Children orphaned. The celebration was mixed with grief and rage at the council's betrayal. Jake brought the Valiant home 3 weeks after the battle. His bluff had never been called, and he never had to admit they could not have harmed the council homeworlds. The ship limped into Earth orbit with failing systems and an exhausted crew. Admiral Frank personally met them at the dock, and the first thing he did was embrace Jake. He told Jake that he had saved humanity, that his desperate gambit had worked when nothing else could have. President Claire awarded Jake and his entire crew the newly created Star of Terra, humanity's highest military honor. Helen received it despite her moral reservations about what they had done. Lisa accepted hers with pride. Chris got his along with a promotion and a new ship to command. Every member of the Valiant's crew was recognized for their sacrifice and courage. The Galactic Council collapsed within 6 months. The Lumens withdrew completely and formed their own alliance. The Korath declared permanent neutrality and closed their borders. Several smaller council species began seeking treaties with humanity, hoping to avoid being on the wrong side if another war started. The council's authority, built over thousands of years, shattered because they had underestimated the species from Earth. Ryan Hughes was promoted to admiral and given command of the rebuilt defense fleet. Sophie Blake became a captain and took command of a new heavy cruiser. Katie Foster received recognition for her defense of New Haven and was put in charge of training all colonial defense forces. Every human who had fought in the war became a symbol of humanity's refusal to surrender. Helen Carter was appointed as humanity's first ambassador at large, tasked with building new relationships across the galaxy. She worked to create a galactic order based on mutual respect rather than domination. Many species listened because they had seen what happened to those who threatened humanity. Helen rebuilt bridges that the Council had burned and created new alliances that the Council had prevented. Dr. Nathan Cross continued his weapons research, but now with unlimited funding and support. The projects were no longer secret. Humanity would never again hide their strength or pretend to be weaker than they were. The galaxy needed to know that humans could defend themselves and would do so without hesitation. A memorial was built on New Haven for the 900,000 civilians who died in the battle. Amy Torres, who had survived her suicide run in an escape pod, attended the dedication ceremony. She placed a wreath at the memorial wall where names were carved into black stone. The inscription read simple words that captured everything. They came for our future. We taught them fear. They learned to run. 6 months after the war ended, President Claire addressed humanity in a speech broadcast across all colonies. She spoke about the cost of their survival and the price of freedom. She acknowledged that humanity had been forced to make terrible choices, to threaten things they never wanted to threaten, to fight with a brutality they wished they did not possess, but she reminded everyone that they had not started the war. The Council had planned genocide, and humanity had simply refused to die quietly. Claire's words were recorded and studied by every species in the galaxy. They learned that humanity was not cruel by nature, but would become ruthless when threatened. They learned that humans valued peace but were devastatingly effective at war. They learned that betraying humanity's trust was the fastest way to make an enemy who would never stop fighting. Jake Morrison received another promotion to admiral and was given command of a new flagship called Humanity's Pride. He stood on its observation deck one evening, looking out at the stars. Helen joined him and they talked about the war and its aftermath. Helen admitted that Jake's bluff had been the right choice, even though it still troubled her conscience. Jake told her that leadership meant making decisions that kept you awake at night, and he would carry the weight of what they had done for the rest of his life. The galaxy had changed. Humanity was no longer the probationary species begging for acceptance. They were a recognized power, respected by some and feared by others. New trade routes opened as species sought human technology and partnership. Human colonies expanded into regions that the Council had previously restricted. Earth's defense fleet grew from 70 secret ships to 200 openly acknowledged warships. But humanity never forgot the lesson of the Council's betrayal. Every human child learned about the war in school. Every military officer studied the battles and tactics. Every diplomat carried the knowledge that pretty words from aliens meant nothing without trust backed by strength. Humanity would offer friendship to any species that came in peace, but they would never again be caught unprepared for war. The story of how 43 humans on a damaged ship saved their entire species became legend. Children played games where they pretended to be Jake Morrison outmaneuvering the Council. Veterans told stories about the battles at Korath Prime and New Haven. The Valiant was preserved as a museum ship, a reminder of humanity's darkest hour and finest moment. Jake's final words to Counselor Zar Keth were carved into the hull of every human warship built after the war. 7 simple words that became humanity's promise to the galaxy. We told them to run. Some had listened and survived. The rest had learned why those words were not empty threats but simple truth. Humanity did not start fights, but they finished them. Always.